What comes to mind when you think of Subnautica? Perhaps it's the opening scene that perfectly sets the stage, maybe it's the comforting cuttlefish, the corporate hellscape that is Altera, but I imagine what probably comes to mind is... It's thalassophobia, the game that gives you thalassophobia, and from what I've seen, this sentiment usually fixates on the danger presented to the player by Subnautica's many aquatic critters, from the mostly peaceful gasopods that defend themselves with acid if you get too close, all the way over to warpers, crab squids, amp eels, and... Fearing the creatures that can actively do you harm makes perfect sense, especially the ones that can easily kill you outright. But a phobia, by definition, is irrational, and you can reassure yourself as much as you want that there isn't any danger, your brain will continue to scream that there is. What am I getting at? I've been playing Subnautica the last few weeks with the creature aggression completely turned off. The predators hunt prey, the gasopods still drop acid when I get close, but nothing attacks me or my vehicles. The only thing that threatens me in the game are my basic survival needs of water, food, and air. And yet, my brain had all it needed to freak out over. Just the visual of a submerged wreck looming over me, clouding the water, metal creaking. Ugh. It took half an hour of squirming, umming, and erring to finally make myself move towards the ramp that leads you onto the wreck, tilting my head back and staring at the wall above my monitor as I navigated along the surface, diligently avoiding any glimpse beneath it. You'd think that I would be catatonic near the ocean, when in reality I quite like the beach, and I'm willing to walk in the shallows and explore some tide pools. But if you ever see me on an actual boat, that's an imposter, take the shot. For all the years I've had Subnautica, I was never able to get very far in the game. The most I could do was reach the mountains and the island, either by following the ridge or skimming the surface so I didn't have to see the yawning void of water beneath me. I never reached the Lost River or beyond because it was too much for my terrified lizard brain to manage navigating down there. This is where that mod comes in. Quite simply named Tweaks and Fixes, it offers a range of options to modify the game experience, many of which can make it more complex and challenging. I changed oxygen consumption to be far more forgiving, and I turned off aggression towards the player and player vehicles because I didn't build that sea moth, paint it, give it a name, and sink mods into it just for some overgrown sea worm with crab legs coming out of its face to crack it like a fucking walnut while I am looking for fragments. Now, there are plenty of videos going over the story and lore. If you only know Subnautica for the memes or cared more about the survival gameplay over the story, the long and short of it is that you crash land on an alien water world that was placed under quarantine 1,000 years ago because of a deadly bacterial outbreak. You build up your base and tools until you have what you need to reach a cure, learning about an alien species that tried to combat it and failed while helping a nearly extinct but benevolent giant known as the Sea Emperor Leviathan hatch its babies who begin distributing a curative enzyme, allowing you to shut down the deadly quarantine enforcement platform and leave the planet. Only for all the materials you used surviving down there to slap you with trillions in debt to Altera, the mega-corporation that rules like a government but with none of the social obligations of one, because outside of the cool biomes and ancient alien intrigue, the world of Subnautica is a capitalist dystopian hellscape where even intimate relationships are to be viewed as business contracts. Jesus Christ, what a nightmare. So instead of doing that, I want to go through how I experienced the game and its biomes, more or less following the directional cues of the story, but focused more on how the irrational screaming slowly abated to the point that I was doing things I never would have been able to handle at the start. We start off gently in the safe shallows biome, and I immediately try to determine where exactly I am, knowing I could be on the very edge of the shallows or smack in the middle of them. I procrastinate by taking in everything I can't see, before eventually opting to drop in from the bottom of the pod, discovering that I am indeed on the edge of the shallows and will have to look at the great murky blue every time I re-enter the life pod. Great. The safe shallows are thankfully easy enough to acclimate to, being brightly lit during the day, colourful and abundant with edible fish, and low on danger to your safety. Mostly. Once night comes, however, even these placid waters are unmanageable for me at this point, and I remained unwilling to go out at night during the early stages of the game when you don't have a bed to skip the night. Outside the anxiety and free from the threat of attack, I approached seeing the usually dangerous fauna up close like a documentary, which is why a lot of the predatory animals ended up in the "can I pet that dog" tier, since look at this good long boy. That's a free dog right there, this sea puppy just wants to play with bits of scrap metal. The kelp forests where you find these long boys provides the first test for my screaming lizard brain. Upon entering the biome proper, the light dims and a green haze descends, lowering your visibility to leave you surrounded by murky water, pockets of glowing yellow bulbs, and the writhing shadows of kelp waving in the current. And there's a point where this unsettling gloom morphs into tranquility. Shrouded in an underwater forest, as sunlight filters down from above, paddlefish darting between the kelp, stalkers playing with scrap, and the distant call of reefbacks offering an alien lullaby. Speaking of the reefbacks, I found the grassy plateaus where you first meet them to be much easier on my brain than the kelp forest, at least initially. The visibility is much better and the reefbacks are one of my favourite animals in the game, but the gulf of space between the seabed and the surface renders air in this biome a distant memory until I could make myself build an air pipe to catch my breath from. Again, there's just something about the space, the water's growing hazy and obscuring all detail until it's nothing more than a blue smear that just activates the smoke detector in my head. Still, these three areas at the beginning are the most comfortable to me, the easiest to become accustomed to with their comparatively shallow depths, general visibility and tranquil vibes. Not that it stays that way for long.
5, 4, 3, 2.
With that came the time to deal with the Aurora leaking radiation everywhere, and while the zone approaching it is shallow and sunny, there's a brown haze to the water as if it's about to experience a silt-out, and this is where I believe the fears of submechanophobia and megalophobia combine into one skin-crawling approach. Getting onto the ship was so uncomfortable, so unsettling to the screaming lizard in my brain, and at no point was I actually in danger. There was no threat. It was a completely irrational level of anxiety. But that's what a phobia is, isn't it? I can gradually acclimate myself to a game like Subnautica, where the entire premise is underwater. It's much harder to do that with something like Fallout 4, when it comes to quests like the Chinese submarine in the harbour, or any little environmental story that points you to an underwater treasure. I have to play that game with a mod that renders the water crystal clear, because anytime I have to interact with it is agonizing otherwise. So, armed with a laser cutter, fire extinguishers, and a propulsion cannon, I was going to make damn sure that I would never have to come back to the Aurora. 0 out of 10, I hate this ship. And yes, that does mean I obtained the blueprints for the escape vessel before I was supposed to, but again, I hate this ship. Beneath the safe shallows, there's a series of caverns where light is a luxury despite the eponymous Jellyshrooms giving off a violet glow. Thanks to previous attempts at playing this game, I remembered where to find the entrance that brings you right down to the Grassy base. I know it's vital to get down there because I can scan the wreckage to unlock blueprints for a full room, so I can stop living in tubes and the water filtration machine, so I don't have to decimate the local population of bladderfish. These things make survival easier and more convenient. Unfortunately, thankfully, there isn't a lot more to get from these caves besides resources that I can acquire elsewhere, so I rarely, if ever, returned, as I didn't want to deal with the darkness or the shrieking of crabsnakes. I have an odd soft spot for the mushroom forest, probably because it's where I found a cuttlefish egg for the first time, which immediately put me on a mission to unlock alien containment and acquire my very own cuttlefish. Adorable. But other than that, I didn't have any strong feelings towards it as a zone. It could unsettle me as easily as the first three given the right time of day, but it rarely set off the screaming lizard. If anything, seeing those mushroom trees loom into sight was a cause for relief, as if being in the thick of it felt like I was hiding, and being hidden means being safe. I found that with really any zone or space that I felt hidden by. The caves in the safe shallows can become pitch dark, but they're small enough that a flashlight or the sea glide can render that irrelevant. I was especially fond of swimming into coral tubes and hiding under bits of wreckage, tricking the screaming lizard into calming down for a moment. Rest in pieces, Sunbeam. The attempt was appreciated. Verticality is much more pronounced here. It certainly earns its name, and it's one of the locations where I get up close and personal with a Reaper Leviathan this time around. Just like the Stalkers, being able to simply watch it without worry of being gobbled was a nice experience. Just really being able to look at any of the beasties up close without worry was nice, because the designs are neat, and most people want to stay an entire postcode away from them. This is one of the zones I have more consistent heebie-jeebies with, the haziness of the water and needing to get out of the water in order to view the Sunbeam event and explore the quarantine enforcement platform, thereby requiring me to get back in the water where I can't see that well beneath the surface, and know damn well there's a sheer drop in front of me on the other side of a seamoth. The zone can kiss my ass. I like this zone. Even though it doesn't get a lot of light, it gets enough to render it tolerable, and the local amp eels are neat as long as you stay away from them. Though kind of like the mushroom forest, it doesn't feel like there's a whole lot to this zone, beyond needing a fluoro sample for the hatching enzyme later. I also know it's actually the bulb zone, but KOOSH zone is funnier, and I mean, come on. Okay. See, I usually approached the floating island in a similar manner to the Aurora, where I skim along the surface until I find a beach I can climb onto, and that carries the same discomfort as the mountain island, but was far, far more tolerable to me than the alternative approach. But this time I started distracting myself with music and approached from beneath, the sea yawning into oblivion beneath me, and climbed out of the water from the pool in the middle of the island. I had never done that before. It would freak out my brain too much in the past. Getting onto the island this way marked a turning point in my ability to overcome the effect these visuals have on me. I was very pleased with myself, enough so that I decided to take on an area that caused me the most issues in the past. The underwater islands are the worst zone for me, because it looks like the islands are floating above a void of water, while already being quite far down, and this attempt was the first time I was able to explore them and get the scans and blueprints I needed. I never stayed longer than I had to, and while some part of me is deeply curious about what lies below, the rest of my brain has joined the screaming lizard. Not even pop songs could fully help me with this one, but I got what I needed nonetheless, and I consider that a win. In theory, I like the Grand Reef. Aesthetically, it's mysterious and cool with its blue anchor pods glowing in the darkness. In practice...
Oh my god, what is that? Oh my god! What is that?
This needs to stop now.
Acquired.
What is that? What the fuck is that?
In practice, I spent the least amount of time in the deeper regions of the Grand Reef because I was just not willing to be around this thing, even if the only harm it posed to me was my peace of mind.
This ecological biome matches 7 of the 9 preconditions for stimulating terror in humans.
The only way I felt comfortable in this particular zone was in the prawn suit. In fact, the prawn suit made me feel comfortable enough to do a lot of things in this game that I wouldn't have done otherwise, because for the most part you can still interact with things while inside the suit. It also doesn't exactly glide through the water like the sea moth. You're running along the seabed, so it makes it feel less like you are underwater. As a spooky bitch, I appreciate the eerie beauty to the Blood Kelp zone, but I just do not want to stay here. The descent into this location was done slowly and carefully, listening out for any indication that I was about to crash the Cyclops, waves of sonar gradually revealing my surroundings to me pulse by pulse, until it gave way to a ghostly green river winding its way through the sea. The use of brine pools for this biome makes it genuinely my favourite area, especially when you come across the Lost Leviathan skull and this tree surrounded by ghost rays. With the amount of ambient light in this area still giving you a general outline and shape of where you are most of the time, it might be stressful to reach, but once I'm here, I'm pretty calm and content. At this point, so far down already, I kept pushing forward through the inactive zone and the lava lakes, stopping only to harvest what I needed for depth upgrades and to investigate the alien thermal plant. The screaming lizard wasn't silent so much as it was relegated to background radiation, overtaken by focus on the goal and annoyance every time a lava leech decided to treat my submarine like a Capri Sun. I was not interested enough to explore around the lava lake once I saw the primary containment facility, and while I did hesitate at first to jump into this final pool so opaque and unknown, I had already made it this far. What was one more leap into the abyss?
Are you here to play? Others came here once. They built these walls. They played alone. They bored me. Now they're gone. And instead, we have you. We are curious whether you swim with the current or fight against it, as they did.
Seeing this for myself felt good, and after reading data entries from earlier about how this entity was held captive for so long, and seeing one of its babies dead in a lab because the precursors forcibly cut it out of its egg in search for a cure, I really wanted to help. And so, leaving behind the noble Dagon-Ussi Cyclops, I went gallivanting off through portals around the map to retrieve what the ancient Sea Emperor needed from me. All that mattered was making sure its little ones could live freely, and in that I was single-minded, charging across the seabed, grappling over chasms and jumping recklessly into yawning voids, even if in real life I still hissed and swore out of discomfort. But I was doing it anyway. And I finally got to see this story conclude for myself, curing Riley of the bacterium, building a rocket to escape with what I would argue is extremely fair and subtle messaging, and leaving this alien ocean behind to finally return home.
Welcome home to all terror. Permission to land will be granted once you have settled your outstanding balance of 1 trillion credits.
You know, on second thought, maybe I should just become a mermaid. And with that, we are done with our Halloween special. I should be streaming Below Zero later on Twitch if you want to come hang out and watch me squirm. Thank you for watching, and special shout out to my supporters on Patreon who are all very handsome people. If you'd also like to be called a very handsome people, check out the link in the description, where you can support me from just £1 a month. And yes, the next video will be Resistance 3, I wanted to get it out before this one, but that is not what happened. Don't forget to drink your water, take your medication, be kind to yourselves, and I will see you all next time.
Break me like a curse, you know that will never work. I'm a little bit absurd, I like dancing on the verge. Anyone can love a pretty little mansion, but could you love a haunted house?